Welcome to the Hardwood Hustle, powered by PGC Basketball. We believe in the value of a coach. We're here to educate, empower, and encourage you to lead like never before. This week, TJ and Sam compare different half-court defenses. They cover off advantages and disadvantages to multiple styles and share helpful things to think about when enhancing your own defense or strategizing to attack an opponent's. Let's get started.
Welcome to the Hardwood Hustle. We're going to do some X's and O's talk today. I'm excited for Sam and I to discuss defenses, like different types of defenses. And this isn't an argument for one defense being better than another, but we are going to compare them. I think this is really important for coaches to think about, what each defense gives to you and what it doesn't give to you. Because the reality is, if there was one perfect defense, we would all be running it. But over the course of the season, you're probably going to face 4, 5, 6, 7 different types of defenses. And that's because a lot of coaches believe in different things on the defensive end. Obviously, I've got mine. Sam's got his. We all have things that we think are going to help us to be able to win. And nobody's figured it out all the way. And I don't think you'll ever figure it out all the way. Some of it comes down to what you can teach. Some of it comes down to age, stage appropriate. But we're more or less just going to compare the defenses and what they bring. And there's a lot of different types of defenses, and full court pressure and zone pressure, but really we're going to kind of focus on the half court here. And we're going to talk about the different ways you could play man. And then we're going to talk about zone defense. Just throw that in. We won't go too deep into just playing zone, but you could run any kind of zone, a 1-2-2, 1-3-1, a 1-2-3. But let's talk about these right here, Sam. In the man-to-man, you could either force the ball to the middle, you could force the ball to the baseline, you could force it to the weak hand. You could play straight up, or you could play some sort of zone. And so let's first talk about the positives and the negatives of forcing the ball to the middle. And I think this would most be well known as pack line defense. I mean, these are principles of the pack line where you're forcing the ball to the middle of the floor. So let's talk about some things that you think are positive and negative in that. So coaches can start thinking, yeah, that fits my team. It doesn't fit my team, fits my personnel, doesn't fit my personnel.
Well, yeah. So I would open with just an overarching thought, TJ, which is which way you said it earlier, but which way is the right way? We always say yes. It depends. I mean, the best example I can give on that is Texas Tech and University of Virginia playing the national championship game, men's Division I, a few years ago. Virginia was a pack line, no baseline, and Texas Tech was a no middle force sideline. And they were both playing the national championship. Their trademark was their defense. And so they both worked. And the key here, coaches, is it's not what you do always, it's how you do it. What you do does matter, but it's how you do what you do. So to answer your question on the forcing middle or not giving up, and pack line, I think, depending on what coach you talk to, TJ, they would not say we force middle. They would say we don't let you go baseline. And that means they're not going to say, hey, go middle, but they're just saying you can't get beat baseline. What's the advantages of allowing middle? Well, your rotations are cleaner. You don't have those, it's a cleaner help and recover. Whereas, you get beat baseline, then you're helping from the opposite, then you're rotating, Xing out the opposite side. So it could be a more complex rotation wise if you force sideline / baseline.
Yeah. And so I think about it when pack line, and I know there's a lot of people listening that are going to, think a lot of different things. Well, that's not exactly pack line. That's not exactly, forcing it baseline or whatever. We're really talking generalities here because I think you could go into people that are running pack line and there's probably 10, 12, 15 variations of the way people run pack line. But in general, when we talk about force middle and pack line, some general principles of that is that, you're going to help early and you're trying not to get in rotations. I mean, that's one of the benefits of it. You're trying not to get into too many rotations. You're really kind of helping over. You're already to the help spot when somebody penetrates. And, when you're forcing down to the baseline, you are going to get somebody to rotate over there and help, and you are going to be in some more rotations. And again, both have positives, both have negatives. When you do get beat baseline in the pack line, that's not a rotation you generally work on because that's something you're trying not to give up. We've run both. We've actually won a conference championship forcing middle and a conference championship forcing baseline. And one of the things that I really did like, I'm going to start with what I did like about the pack line defense is that you're in less rotations. I mean, the less time you're in rotations, the less time your team has to scramble, talk, communicate, get mismatched, all that kind of stuff. I did like that about that. I also did like the fact that, your body position forced people away from the baseline. And I thought it was really easy for the post player to really work that high side because the low side, the body was always in the passing lane. I thought those two things matched up really well. The post player didn't have to go, high to front to low. They could really just stay in one spot, which is the high side. And when the ball got reversed, they were already in good position. And so they weren't always required to be that baseline drive help because, the guard's job was to not give up the baseline. And so I thought it really simplified the game for the post player, which in turn allowed us to be in pretty good rebounding position. That's one thing that I really liked about the philosophy of the pack line.
Yeah, I was going to say similar things. Yeah, I like the post defense, the rebounding, and the less rotations, which I referenced earlier. For everybody listening, I'm not a force middle coach, but yeah. So I'm not. That wouldn't be something I run. But those are definitely the positives to it. I don't
Yeah.
have anything else to add to that.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that let's just go down the positives of each one really quickly. But I think the positives, and then we'll go down to the negative because I think it's really important for coaches to know what wins and what loses. You know what I mean? Like what could really beat you. Like I think if you're going to be really good at whatever defense you teach, you have to know like what's the downfall of that defense. And so we'll go over the goods and then we'll go over the bads. And so in the pack line, I think that's something we like a lot. I think that people underestimate that one of the teachings of the pack line is actually putting some ball pressure, putting some pressure on the ball, which I think you can do in any type of defense. But I think that the other thing is they're shrinking the floor in this way is they're not really extended out there. So they're not putting pressure, out at 23, 24 feet. When you think about the pack line, the original pack line, there was Dick Bennett would draw a line at about 16, 17 feet. And that's kind of where you were supposed to be when somebody else was on the ball. So everybody was kind of loaded to the ball. So I think that was pretty simple. I think it's one of those things that has really clear and precise teaching points. I think that if you're a pack line team, there's not a lot of gray area. This is what you're trying to do on every possession. I like that. I like the fact that I think because you're playing a little less aggressive from the sense of being in the passing lanes, I think typically you're in good rebounding position. You're inside the person you're guarding. They're not getting behind you a ton in the pack line. So I think those are all things that are effective in pack line. I'm sure coaches that run pack line have a lot more than that, but just generalities. Those are some things that are I think really powerful. Let's go second to forcing baseline. We'll kind of breeze through the good on all these, but Sam, I know you do a lot of this. I know last couple of years we've done a lot of this. What are some things that you like about forcing to the baseline?
Yeah, and I would actually change what you said there. Words matter, and whether yeah. So I would say we force sideline and the distinction.
And
Not
I knew you were going to get mad about this one, but I'm
yeah,
trying to speak in generalities. Like just you're either because we're next going to go to the team that's straight up, and they could go either way. But if you were to get beat, you wouldn't
yeah,
want it to be to the middle. You'd want it to be to the
yeah.
baseline.
But I say that, and because I do think there's a technique involved, which is a lot of players when you say force baseline, they give the baseline. We want to force sideline, and we don't want to give up baseline. We don't want to give it up. We want to guard that ball. And all of this, TJ, I think is really important. It starts with a mindset and a heart set. You will not be a good defensive team if your players do not buy into that side of the floor. And I'm not, we joke a lot about like, and Mike Neighbors does it, like the T-shirts, defense wins championships. Well, so does offense. And I would say competitive effort matters on the defensive end. And so I'm not saying that it's all we want to be good on defense and good on offense, but you got to care on defense. If you don't have your best players that care and are held accountable on the defensive end, you're limited in how far you can go, a la, James Harden or here in Atlanta with Trae Young. Like until your better players give a competitive effort on the defensive end, you're just not going to be that good of a defense, I don't think, unless they're surrounded by just some absolute warriors across the board from four other positions. Now, I just took a major side road, but that's important. Now, the positives to me are forcing sideline. You have less floor to guard. When the ball gets to the outer third and you're forcing it to the sideline, you don't have two-thirds. And it is a lot easier when you have a plan on the ball. Most players don't play with a plan on the ball. They just play defense. So playing pack line or forcing sideline, you have a plan. You're taking away something. You may get beat, but at least I know where they're going. We know where our help is. So I like it mainly for that reason, TJ. Secondarily, along with that reason, is I think when the ball gets in the middle of the floor on penetration, that you have multiple options. You can dump to the left, the right, you can kick. And when you force sideline, you limit the passing options. For those two main reasons is why I would say a strength of forcing sideline.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. I mean, I think that when the ball is kept down into, I think even back in the day, you'd hear this word like shrink the floor, and when the ball is kept in one area of the floor, you can really make the ball stick. So for instance, if you're forcing down to the baseline and, they're not allowed to reverse the ball freely back up top, with a little bit more pressure, then the ball sticks. And we all know that like one of the lowest percentage play, if not the lowest percentage play, I think it was last year in college basketball, is the ISO play. It was scored at like 0.74, 0.75. I don't remember the exact number, but that's because it's just a hard play to make, isolation. Now in the NBA, I think is also the lowest form of play too, but it's higher than it is in college. And one of those reasons in the NBA is because the defense is different. But in college or in high school or at any level of basketball, ISO is usually not the highest scored play. It's usually one of the lower end, if not the lowest end. So therefore, when you can make players play in small sides, and that's why I think people do a lot of small sided games, because one of the hardest things to do in basketball is make reads. When the defense comes over, do I drop it off? Do I kick it out? And most teams don't have 5 players that can make reads. I mean, you're lucky if you have 2 or 3 that can make really good reads on a regular basis. But when you start taking in time and speed and game, now you got to make reads. Now, if they've got to make decisions faster in a smaller area with under pressure, those decisions become even worse. And so one of the things I like about keeping the ball in one particular area or forcing it down that way is it can really make the ball stick and take a team that's good at moving it and take them out of their offense and make them more of an ISO team. Other one you pointed out, I really like the idea of knowing exactly where your rotations come from. I think no matter what defense you run, you're going to come up against a good offense that's going to make you get into rotations, and they're going to make you somehow they're going to beat one player and you're going to get to the next level. And, I think about this and, Tony Bennett and them have obviously been unbelievable. And they had a down year a couple of years ago. I think their talent level was just a little bit down. They played Gonzaga, who put you in a ton of pinches, and it was struggling. They were in a lot of rotations, and it wasn't their strength in that particular game. And so it doesn't really matter. You're always going to find some team that's going to be able to put you in some type of rotations. And so one of the benefits of keeping the ball down or forcing it down is you know exactly where your rotations are going to come from every single time. And if you go watch some film on somebody like Baylor or Texas Tech, some teams that have been known to be really good at this, and Baylor winning a national championship with it, they did get beat. Or you can go back to the days of UConn when they won it. I mean, they basically just forced you down to a shot blocker every single time. And they gave you the baseline. They weren't even forcing you to the sideline. They just gave you the baseline and said, make a decision under this big trap, under this big situation. They were happy to put you down there. And they got really good at just hammering their rotations every single time. And so I think shrinking the floor, putting some pressure, making the ball stick, and then also keeping it out of the highway, like you alluded to. There's a lot of things in the NBA. I think they do a lot of work to get the ball in the middle of the floor because there are so many, options. And I know as a man-to-man coach, I don't like losing the middle of the floor because it screws up all of our rotations. If somebody gets down the middle and you're like, even the middle ball screen, which side helps, which side doesn't help, right? Or in the Princeton, when the ball gets centered, are you in help or are you one pass away? Are you like, there's just a lot of confusion in that because when the ball's at the top, it can be, really difficult to make a read. So those are some of the better about forcing baseline. What about weak hand? What if you were to force the ball to the weak hand on the regular basis? Like what's some things that you like about that?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I want to answer that. The one thing on Baylor, if I'm not mistaken, Baylor was a heavy zone defense team. The year before, the summer offseason before they won national championship, Scott Drew and their staff went to man, and in large part, I think that was inspired and influenced by Texas run and Chris Beard and what they were doing there. And I think Texas Tech even had like top defense. They were a sideline forcing team. Our friend Dave over at Louisiana Tech, he and I were talking about that. I think they were like the highest defensive efficiency. To your question though, TJ, even in the defense I teach, and we've been doing it at our clinics this fall. When the ball's in the middle third on our fourth sideline, we actually say weak no arc. Weak no arc, meaning when the ball's in the middle third of the floor, we force it to their weak hand, but we don't allow it to get to the inside the arc. What I like about weak hand force is you're making that player go to their weak hand, and at all levels. I mean, at your college level, even at the pro level, even there are players that are just much better going to one hand. I mean, Michael Jordan was a dominant right hand. Tony Parker, dominant right hand. Now, everybody knew they were going right. They still couldn't stop them. That's when you're a special player.
Yeah.
But who is it? Smart up in Canada, who won like 12 out of 13 national championships. Built his system around forcing it to the weak hand. So it worked. Again, all of this works. But let's talk about the pot. To answer your question, I like it because it forces it to the weak hand. That's great. That's good. The second thing is, if you do that every day in practice, what happens to your team? They get better at having to work on, if they're 95% of players are left, they're going to dribble with their left hand better. They're going to pass with their left hand better. They're going to be more equipped and efficient with their weak hand. So, coaches look at it globally too, not just your games, but what is it going to do to your teams in practice when you do that every day?
Yeah. Yeah. Those are two good points. I mean, it's going to make your players better at that. It's also going to make players pass with their weaker hand more often, make decisions going to their weaker hand a lot of times. And, I think all of those things, and I particularly think that's even more effective, where I don't know if I always love it, like at the younger youth ages. Like, I think players need to develop, but I imagine you probably could steal and win a lot of games at a young age by just forcing everybody their weak hand. Most kids at 8, 10, 11, 12 years old, they're going to really struggle to make those decisions and be able to play. And so that's a way to put a lot of pressure on kids at that age. I mean, you can look at the flip side of that. Maybe it'll help kids to develop because they need to learn how to use the other hand. But I think that's one thing that can possibly be a really positive about it. And you're right, they will develop that, and you will have players going to the places where they're going to make decisions not with their strongest suit. So I think that that's really, really some positives about it. So let's go on to number 4, straight up. And I think this would probably be like a la Michigan State, who's kind of best known for just kind of straight up guard the ball. And I think some of the things that they're trying to accomplish there is like, look, what hurts you the most, like getting beat off the dribble. And so rather than kind of influence somebody or shade somebody or open up one direction or whatever, they're just putting emphasis on not getting beat. And if you don't get beat, obviously the positives, you're not in a ton of rotations. Like if you can sit there and guard the dribble and you got 4 or 5 tough guys that keep it in front of them, then you're not having to deal with all that rotation stuff. And I think they put a premium or an emphasis on not letting anybody go right, left, or whatever, but I'm going to stay in front of the ball. And I think that the benefit of that is if you're able to do that and constantly stay in front of the ball is obviously you're going to not be in too many rotations. You're going to be in good spots to be able to box out. You're going to be in good position on the floor. And so when you're always in position, good things are going to happen. A lot of times, we talked about force and baseline a second ago. One of the weak spots of that can be that you can be out of rebounding position unless you work on it a ton, because you're always going to help. You're always rotating. You might have a little chipping down on a big. That's a rebounding disadvantage. If you're straight up, if you keep it in front of you, if you're not rotating a ton because you have players that can really sit down, lock up, and keep it, they're not going to have a lot of those box out issues, and they're going to rebound the ball better. And that's typical of a Tom Izzo team. They rebound the ball pretty well.
Yeah, I think the main advantage here on straight up is that what you're trying to do is simplify it for your players. I think you say this a lot, which is slow meat, slow feet. And so the main advantage of the straight up is you're saying don't worry about where you're forcing it. I just want you to focus on guarding the ball best you know how. So I think that's why a lot of coaches, or what the biggest advantage would be, Coach K and Duke, this is what they did for years, and playing straight up on it, closeouts. And so there's advantages. Again, I am not a proponent of this because I believe that it's a lot easier to guard the ball when you know where it's going. And I can say, as a player who in college, I'd say most nights I was guarding a player who was quicker than me at the point guard spot. They were quicker, maybe more athletic. Not maybe, oftentimes they were. So before I stepped on the floor, they had that advantage. But oftentimes I could guard at a high level. My coaches gave me the opponent's perimeter's best offensive player oftentimes. And I would say that's because I always knew where the ball was going to go. I would crowd their space, and I would force them where I want them to go. And sometimes they say, well, shoot, if you're not as quick, back off. And I say, no. I say, actually, I need to crowd their space so that I can force them where I want them to go. And, you have to be, now we get really specific, which we're not going to do right now, on how you crowd their space and how you close out. And, that's the advantages of the straight up. But again, I'm not a proponent of it because I want to make them go where they don't want to go.
Yeah. Yeah. So those were your advantages / disadvantages, because there's a lot of things you don't like about the straight up. But I mean,
Yes.
I think the advantage, I think, is, and the disadvantages we'll get to, which I think you hit pretty hard right there, that those are some disadvantages. But the advantages of being able to be in front. And I think, PGC, we talk about, take away 2, fight for the third. And I think it's where you take away the shot, force them, to wherever your system has, and then fight for that last one on the dribble. And straight up, they might give a little bit of space there, and they might just say, look, I'm going to win that first dribble. I think, being, playing devil's advocate here, if I'm body to body with somebody and I'm forcing them one way, we're even. And usually the person with the ball is going to be the first one to the floor, is going to be the one ahead of that. A lot of times that happens. And if I backed off and I've given you some space, a lot of times that first dribble, if I'm ahead of it, I can keep it in front of me. Now, and then you have to work on a whole different series of things. You got to work on a stab dribble. You got to, but if I'm given a little bit of space to keep the ball in front of me, then you might have to have a different set of moves and a different set of ball handling to beat me off the second dribble rather than the first dribble. But when you're crowding the ball, sometimes that first dribble, if you're not tough enough, if you're not quick enough, Sam, you talk about how you were good that defense. Not everybody can go up there, crowd the ball, force it one way, and still have a chance at winning that dribble. It might be an automatic. I mean, I see my team, forcing baseline. Sometimes there's some guys that get back in front of the ball. There's some other guys, they don't get back in front of the ball. And one of the things that starts happening real quick in practice is they start backing up. And so even though we want them to pressure it, they start backing up because they've continuously gotten beat trying to force it that way.
Well,
So
I would add, so I'd add just one quick thing. I mean, it's a nuanced conversation on how to crowd the ball, because it's like, if you have a long closeout, you can't crowd it when you're covering 20 feet of space, right? But it's like, if you're getting there close to the bubble, again, don't want to get crazy detailed here, but there's just a special teaching involved in how to crowd it as you approach it.
I think so. And I think the people that guard it straight up have their nuances too, of things they would say of why we're guarding it straight up and what we're thinking in there. It's just like the people that are forcing it to the middle have their nuances. And so we're not experts in all these defense. We've seen them, we've scouted them, we obviously have our favorites. But somebody that's teaching any one of these particular defenses would have nuances they think help them to be able to be really good at their particular type of defense. All right, last one. Let's talk about zone here. And we won't go real in depth in this one because there's so many different zones to cover off here. But what are the benefits of playing zone? I think about this. Coach, mentor of mine always says this. Sometimes it doesn't matter how good your zone defense is if the other team's zone offense is no good. And I think that can play out a lot of times. I mean, sometimes it just stops the ball. Sometimes they just get out of what they do best. If you play a particular type of zone, the other team has a really great man-to-man offense. Sometimes they just get out of what they do and they stop doing what they do. I think another thing about zone, we just did this in our clinic in Atlanta, and I talked to some zone coaches before we went in there, is, they feel like there's 5 or 6 or 7 actions they see on the regular basis that if they practice those every day, I mean, because when you play man-to-man, I mean, people got 1,000 different things they're doing, right? I mean, they're doing zoom action, they're running through ball screens, they're setting the ball screen, roll and raise action. They've got cutter action, they've got inside out action, split action. There's 1,000 different things to cover in man to man. And if you look at zone, there's not 1,000 options offensively to go out there in his zone. And even if somebody has to run their zone offense, they don't do it all the time. They just have developed less options. So I think narrowing the view of things that you have to guard is also a benefit of the zone.
Yeah, I think there's four big reasons why zone defense could be a good thing. And you've mentioned maybe one or two of these. So one, it can protect players in your system who can't guard very well. Two, foul trouble situations. You got a best player in foul trouble, or you got multiple players. Number three is zone offense is worse oftentimes than man offense. Most coaches spend a lot more time on their man offense than zone offense. And the fourth is its tempo change. You can throw a zone defense in there to change the tempo and the flow of the game. The other team may be getting into a flow on you, and you throw a zone. It gets them out of flow, gets them out of sorts, and then allows you to settle down and get back control of the game. So those are the four reasons. I'll rename them. You can protect your players. You can foul trouble, number two, situations. Number three, zone offense is usually worse than man offense. And number four, for tempo change.
Yeah. And the fifth one, I think less things to work on, guarding, is that the one I talked about there. Just, I mean, if you go against one team one night that runs spread pick and roll, the next day they run flex, and the next team runs dribble drive, and like you're really working on different stuff for every game in man to man, where zone you would have less things to cover off. All right, so we've been going for a while, so we're quickly going to hit on no long debates here. Really, just really giving coaches a high level view of like, hey, look, here's the positives of each of these things. Here's the negatives of each of these things. And coaches that are passionate about force and middle or base or weak or straight up or zone, like they could go on and on for why their defense is the best. And we'll make some cases in some other episodes. But for right now, like just a high level view, like if you're going to force middle, what are some really good benefits of that? And when I think about that is, we've seen Tony Bennett be phenomenal at it, right? Like we've seen his teams be really successful. I've faced some teams that do a really good job of forcing middle and pack line. And, I think one of the things that's really good about it is that just you have to make quick decisions. The help comes early on the perimeter. And so, a lot of times players don't have time to get downhill before the help shows up because they're trying to keep the ball out of the paint. And so you're going to get perimeter help upon perimeter help. And so, a lot of players having to make 1-2 dribble decisions. You're not getting clean reads. I think one of the hardest things for players to do is make reads, and they're having to make a lot of different reads. Like you're not usually going to get a good pack line team. You're not going to get the first drive. You're not likely going to get the second drive. You got to keep working against the pack line team. And I think the more decisions players have to make, the more they can make mistakes. That's one thing I really like about, forcing middle or pack line. All right, let's talk about the disadvantages of each one now, Sam. So let's talk about the disadvantage and let you start us out here of forcing middle or pack line.
Yeah, I think the biggest one, which I alluded to on forcing sideline, is like when the ball gets to the middle of the court, there's just more options for the offensive player. Dump offs to either side on the block, kick outs to either side, safety valve passes to the return to behind. And so I think that's the major disadvantage. Obviously, a pack line coach on here would say, well, wait, we're not going to let them get deep enough to get to the paint and cause that. So we get that, and we could again have debates of 3 hours on each of these. But that would be probably the biggest disadvantage of the pack line.
Yeah. Yeah, and when I think about disadvantages of it, and again, a lot of things to like about it. I think that if your team doesn't get really good at those and you're getting beat, like there's places you can get beat on the floor where you just got to rotate and you're not working on those rotations on the regular. I think there's teams that they're going to beat you baseline. They're going to put you into an action with a back screen and a shape up, and eventually you're going to get a bad closeout. And when you get that bad closeout, they're going to get baseline on you. And then you're in a new rotation that you haven't been in before, and you're scrambling out of that. I think that can be tough. I think that I think pack line can force turnovers. I don't think it. I think by nature it's a little bit passive in the sense that it's not like aggressively forcing turnovers, so it doesn't always create a ton of offense for you. Another thing is like I think if you're running, middle and playing some pack line, there's a lot of times when the other team can dictate the pace of the game, even if you want it to be a particular pace. Most time pack line teams, if you look at Virginia, and I know we're kind of getting narrow just looking at one team, but when you talk about Virginia, it's a really low scoring game, right? I mean, and they less possessions because they're really sound in that defense, not forcing a lot of turnovers, but making you take a lot of bad shots. Well, if you have a team that's, really athletic and you feel like they're good and you want more possessions than the other team, that could be a problem sometimes. And I know, Mike at Neighbors at Arkansas, he does that. They play with pretty good pace on offense. But if they're really patient on defense, then there could be less possessions. And if you want a team that you want more possessions with, sometimes it's easier against, or sometimes a patient team can take a little while. Now, if you get down to a pack line team, like, when Virginia's up 10, it feels like they're up 30. You know what I mean? So that is one thing. It doesn't feel like you're coming back. And there's some teams you're up 10 and it feels like it's 2, and Virginia is the opposite of that. But they also have not been the come from behind team a lot. You know what I mean? When they get down, they don't typically come back down from 10 or 12 or 14.
Yeah, I was just going to add, like the defense that I run, this vice defense where we force it sideline, we have 2 variations out of it where we sit in the gaps heavy like a pack line. We just force it to the outside. So there's pack line principles within the forcing sideline. And I think Texas Tech, for that matter, has some pack line principles that are forcing sideline. And last point here is, I do this a lot with our youth teams where we pick up full court and run a pack line sideline full court system. So you just take what you teach in the half court, bring it into the full court. We stretch the ball, we shrink the floor in the full court. We're teaching guys how to play at high intensity. And, even, Corey Baldwin, who spoke at our Atlanta clinic, they're a full court pressing team all game, every game with pack line principles. So I just want to make that note. You can be a pack line system in the full court. I know we're focused on half court on this show right now.
Yeah. Yeah, and so that's a way that you could speed that up. And, I know coaches are going to have a ton of thoughts. Well, you can do this and you can do that. And really given a higher level view, not even so, one, so you can evaluate defenses. 2, like I think it's important, like as a college coach, I feel like it's important for me, and terminology may be different, but to know a lot of different types of defenses, because I'm going to see a lot of different types of defense. I probably won't know it as well as the coach that's running it and lives it every day and knows all the little nuances. But it is helpful to understand what they're trying to accomplish in each one of these defenses. Let's talk about force and baseline now.
Yeah, the disadvantage would be what we already two of the big disadvantages of this. Your rotations, you have to work more on rotations when you do get beat. And then 2, your post defense sometimes is susceptible, meaning the ball's in the right slot. You're on the high side on that ball. The post is ball side block. Ball gets swung to the right wing. If they have a post player who seals you out, you could get sealed out on penetration. You're susceptible to that baseline drive and finish. Now, my teaching would be we anticipate, we fight around it in front and then get to the low side for that very reason. But those are the 2 big reasons: your rotations and the post defense.
Yeah, and we force baseline, and that is one thing I think you need to spend a lot of time on. It's been one of the more frustrating ones for me. I mean, if you're going to force baseline, like icing ball screen matches up perfectly with it, right? And if you're going to force baseline, on that post, like, you could go to the low side and always be in their rotation. You're going to be a little susceptible when the ball gets forced back up top, whether that guy can sit in front of you and they can throw the ball down the lane. But I do think you do need to pay a lot of attention to how your inside interior defense. And again, that's one of the reasons I like the pack line is I feel like their interior defense matches their exterior defense really, really well. And, and when you look at the forcing baseline, that's one of the things that it's a disadvantage a little bit. Like it's not always clean for that post player to know exactly what I need to be doing. Sometimes they get sealed. Sometimes they're a little bit late. And then when they're taken out of that into a ball screen, the opposite guard might be the low person. So that changes. Now, I think those are things you and I would say we just continue to work on. We feel like the advantages outweigh the disadvantages, but those are not clean advantages of baseline for sure. All right, what about weekend? What are some disadvantages there?
Well, this is one like, okay, are we forcing everything left? Are we just saying, okay, we're going to force everything left, or are we truly forcing it? We can. If we're forcing everything left, the built-in automatic is, well, what happens when you go against a good left-handed player? You're playing into their strength. Or if we're truly forcing weak, there could be confusion. Wait, is he right? Is he left? Is she left? Is she right-handed? But that would be basketball IQ and scouting and how well you're getting across your scouting report to your players. But that'd be the first answer I have.
Yeah, and I think, a lot of that has how much time you have to prepare for each team. If you're going to go straight weekend, if you're straight going to force everybody to the left, one of the things that I didn't like about that is, all right, well, on one side you're helping on the ball, the other side you're not helping in the ball. Your rotations change from side to side, and we attempted it a few years ago, and that was the more difficult thing is players having to learn the ball was different on each side of the floor, and how we rotated was different on each side of the floor, and that was difficult. And I think if you're just going to go straight weekend every time, I think you have to have a team you have time to prepare for, where you have scouting reports every time and you make sure that you understand, hey, this player does this, that player does that. And maybe they're left-handed, but they're better with their right hand. You have to do a lot of discovering and talking about that. And that can be a difficult thing on that one
Mm-hmm.
for sure. And straight up, I think you hit on a lot of these earlier, some of the disadvantages straight up, but why don't you recap those for us again?
Yeah, I mean, straight up, you're just allowing that offensive player to go left or right, and so you don't have a plan on the ball necessarily. Whereas I think the advantage is when you know where you're going to force it, and so when you're straight up, I think you're empowering the offense to do more of whatever they decide to do. Whereas I always believe on defense, we want to have an offensive defensive mindset. That's why, like in a huddle, need a defensive stop, TJ, 30 seconds to go, and I'll be in the huddle. I'll be like, "Hey, we're on offense. We're on offense." Like telling our guys, like we're aggressive. We're the ones and we go offense on three, 1, 2, 3, like but that's the approach is we play offense for 32 minutes. We play offense for 40 minutes. We some coaches say we're all gas, no brakes, but no, we just want to have this mindset at all times that we force people where we want them to go, and then on offense we go where we want to go. We are in control of the outcome of this game. And I got away again. I just get excited. I do want to add thing. This is another side note. I think there's 8 things, and I'll rattle them off really quick. I think there's 8 things on as a man-to-man defensive coach. You've got to know where you stand on mindset, transition, defense, on ball principles, off ball, ball screens, away screens, rotations, post defense, and rebounding. That was 9 things actually. So I think you got to know those 9 things.
Yeah, in pretty much any defensive system, those things are going to be important. I mean, even in the zone, I think how you're going to guard the ball, how you're going to rotate and help, how you're going to, I think all those things, most all of them apply to the zone as well.
Well, I know we're going to get into that. Maybe do we want to flow into the zone? I mean,
Well, let's finish straight up. I think there's one other, disadvantage is we're just identifying advantages and advantages of each one. If maybe a coach is just thinking about, man, how do I attack that one this year? Or if a coach is thinking about which one am I going to run this year? I think one other disadvantage of the straight up would be that, if that player goes baseline, okay, this person's helping. If that person goes middle, this person's helping. So, because you don't always know where you're trying to influence the ball, or you're not hammering it down every single day, a help defender might be a little bit slow too, because they don't know if they're out to the ball, if they're helping in. So that can slow down just because they don't know the system, every single time of where they're going to go. So, let's jump into zone now. So what are some disadvantages of zone?
well, to me, the disadvantage, again, there are a lot of positives, but the disadvantage, there's less accountability sometimes, less accountability. There's less clarity on rebounding coverage, rebounding principles, rebounding responsibilities. That's probably the best way to say it. Like, am I boxing this girl out or am I boxing this guy out? And so that gives me, icky feelings not knowing that. And I also think a disadvantage is in some ways you're letting the offense dictate things and you're kind of reacting to them, whereas we'd want the offense in a man-to-man defense, we want them to react to us.
Yeah. I think those are all good. Coaches, we just went for, 40 minutes talking about 5 different types of defenses, and you break that down into the good and the bad. So really at the end of the day, like we were talking about 10 different things, which allows about 3.5 minutes per, each one of those to talk about. And so we're obviously not going deep in those. We're not talking about the nuances. And I recognize that I try to use the most general terminology, when we say middle or pack line. I know other people might have another name or something different that they do, or base or weak or straight up or zone, different types of zones. We recognize that there's a lot of variety and a lot of difference and a lot of nuances and a lot of things going on there. Our goal was not to go deep today, and we will go deep on some other days into some of these defenses of things that, how you can really make this effective for your team. But for right now, just getting a general understanding of what all those defenses are, what are the positive, what are the advantages, should I choose this one, should I not, what are some things I need to be aware of, how can I attack these people when I see these different defenses throughout the year. But I do think whether you run a particular defense or not, it is very helpful to learn about other defenses, and oftentimes you'd be surprised. I think there's things you could steal from a lot of defenses. One example that you talked about is, and we do the same thing, if the ball's in the middle of the floor, we do send it to the weak hand. And that's just an advantage in the middle of the floor because we don't want the ball in the middle of the floor. We want to get it to a sideline. And somebody that's weak-handed all the time, that's something you can learn from them. And I think in any of these situations, you could go learn something about forcing baseline that they do really well that could apply to a pack line, and vice versa, something about a pack line or any of these particular defenses. So coaches, again, didn't go super deep on any of those, but hope this gives you a good broad brush understanding of some different benefits and some negatives of each type of defense. Love to hear your thoughts at Hardwood_Hustle, some things that you're thinking about and what you'd like us to go deeper on. If you want us to talk about a particular defense, get into some more depth in some ones, and which one should we talk about first? So, hey, he is Sam. I am TJ. Thanks for joining us today. We are the Hardwood Hustle.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Hardwood Hustle, where we believe in the value of a coach. We want to bring you quality content and journey with you. Stay connected with us on Twitter and Instagram. You can find us at Hardwood_Hustle. From the Hardwood Hustle team, thanks again. We can't wait to be with you again next week.